Hey, this is Andy with Troglodyne along with George.
Eight.
Today we're going to be talking a little bit about reviews and specifically
Code reviews,
right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily a performance review, but in some terms it is a performance review, but it's a different kind of performance review.
By your peers, yeah.
Yeah, more of a peer review. Whenever you encounter things where just one more thing,
Yeah.
sometimes it seems like on a pull request or something like that, you're trying to get a review done, and it always just seems that another reviewer or someone else or something like that,
They just pop right in like Columbo with just one more thing. That's why we sort
Right.
of call it Columboism.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes it isn't necessarily something that you're doing. It may be something that they lack understanding, or they have something else they're working on that they think would be a better solution.
Or they're just too busy to actually take the proper amount of time to understand the request as it's actually done.
Right, but what we're going to talk about today is a few strategies that people typically pick to deal with it. Which ones don't work, which ones do, and
Sort of what the situation involves and how you can sort of pick away and find out what the actual intent of the reviewer really is.
Right. So one of the most common types of things you can get is where someone is already working on something, or they have a idea in the mind of, say, you're working on something that I've worked on before, and don't touch my baby because my baby's beautiful.
Yeah.
In that sort of case, a lot of times what you're trying to do is make sure that they understand that the changes you're making are either valid, or that you're not, making my baby ugly, something like that.
Sort of fighting the design. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes in that case, if it is indeed you're misunderstanding what their design is, something like that, then yeah, the point well taken, adjust it and move on. But sometimes when it's just like, well, I don't really see the point there for that sort of thing, it's more of a validational thing of, yeah, okay.
Yeah, they want to be heard, and they want to make sure that the way they would have done it is the way it gets done. And they don't have time to actually do it themselves, but they want you to do it the way that they would have done it.
And sometimes in that case, the best approach is saying, yeah, I understand that you feel that way, but this is the most expedient approach, and this is all that we have time for.
And generally, the way that I've dealt with that in the past is, number one, sort of just making it clear that there are time constraints here. We don't actually have the ability to do it exactly the way you want, but we can get this little bit in that moves us forward, and then we can work on addressing those things later, and put an issue on the backlog or something like that for taking care of it.
Right, which will kind of bring us to the splash for this video. We're going to have a meme there for you that shows you the correct thing regarding that, which, as kind of dark the humor is there, it definitely points to some of the better strategies for dealing with some of those issues in a pull request, when it's something somebody is requesting a change that they're like, yeah, this is a big blocker, something like that, where it's like, well, yeah, sure, it's a blocker, except that we've made that into a task and we're going to punt that off for later for you.
Yeah. And there's other situations where, especially if the reviewer is especially attached to the solution, or the way that they want to do it, and they're just continually pushing back and back and back and back. At some point, you can sort of troll them into either doing it themselves, which is what essentially they really want to do, because they want to. It's sort of, you're treading on their territory, and they want to actually like keep people out of their territory. Then you basically just keep making the solution that irritates them maximally until they actually take the task away from you and do it themselves, which is,
in that case, it's well volunteered anyways. So as like the person working on it, it's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Great.
I mean, from a corporate and productivity point of view, it's actually pretty bad, because it's basically they have decided that they're going to impact schedule because they're unwilling to let go and allow other people to cooperate with them. But this is how things work sometimes, and you just can't get around it. And it's like, okay, if that's the way you want to do it, let's let you do it,
Yeah. But whenever that's not the case, you can usually have some pretty wide latitude, so long as you're actually explaining, okay, what is this? Why am I doing this? That sort of thing, which is why very verbose commit messages, even though a lot of people will, eyes glaze over, all that sort of stuff, just like most people glaze over whenever you have a large commit with a lot of changes whenever they're trying to review it. Uh, it still can be helpful, at least if the reviewer is earnest.
Yeah, and the other way you can get around this, especially if it's a large change set you're trying to get in, is to make sure to only do a bunch of different merges, all of little pieces of functionality, such that the person who's worried about this stuff, and it's essentially an unfounded concern because you've tested this stuff well and all that stuff, is to just chop it until they really can't put two and two together, or they don't have time to review that many requests, or they're able to actually digest the chunk to the point that they can then, the next time they get through it, they can start to see the logical progression and everything feels good. They're not just being thrown in the deep end immediately and they start to get uncomfortable. Instead, they're being eased in through the baby side of the pool until they get all the way to the deep end. Which
is why some programmers kind of jokingly refer to themselves as bug authors, because a lot of times to get things done, you write in things that you could fix by just having a larger commit set, a larger, change set. But, well, since that's going to actually be more problematic because it's more change, then you're just like, yeah, whatever, let the bug in, I'll file it after that because I know exactly what this is going to do.
In fact, I already have the patch. Yeah. And so, by that, yes, it's going to hurt productivity from a point of view of you're going to create more reports, you're going to have to churn through that bureaucratic process of getting that done and put in another merge and transition issues. But the fact is that just due to the way that people actually work, that's the way it actually has to be done for it to actually be accepted and move on in the organization.
Right. This especially becomes more of a problem whenever you're trying to collaborate with other teams within a firm or with other people that you don't work with closely on a regular basis. Because then it's a question of mind meld. You don't understand what each other are doing, and as such, you're either going to be working at cross purposes or on the same thing at the same time a lot of the time, and then you get conflict.
Yeah, and especially the bigger the change set gets, the more likely it is to step on something else somebody's doing, and people are, I would say, irrationally attached and upset by having to resolve merge conflicts when the fact is they're actually fairly straightforward and they should be expected. But nevertheless, people get pretty emotional about it because it's like, oh, I was doing it and everything worked fine until your dang changes came in, boy.
Yeah, well, and certainly if you're dealing with a particularly hairy one, which as code kind of keeps accreting, if you get into the point where, say, you've got a 1,000-line or more diff, and everything's conflicting, okay, that kind of gets annoying over time. But
yeah, and especially most people don't really know how to read diffs all that well, and they're just not really that well made for understanding. Most people are just not capable of parsing them in the way that is necessary to actually understand the change.
Because it's more for a computer program to apply patches than necessarily to aid reading.
Yeah, and so the less diffs and the less conflicts you can have involved, the less people are going to have this barrier where, like we said, it's for long, like with long commit messages, eyes glaze over. And there's probably, in my experience, I would say it's when you have more than about 5 conflicts that happen, or you have a change set that's a diff more than 1,000 lines, it's guaranteed eyes glaze over time, and it's going to be what's this, what's that, what's this, what's that. And even if you address the first concerns for the pull request, you push some changes, you adjust, you fix, they're going to look at it again, and it's going to be enough time has passed that they're going to see something else that they didn't see the first time because they were speed reading it and their eyes were glazing over.
Well, right, and a lot of times, if you're the person even resolving the conflict, you can fall prey to this yourself while resolving the conflict and result in having, say, duplicated code, some sort of bug introduced during the merge conflict resolution, all that sort of thing, just because, oh, great, it's conflict, 5 out of 48.
Yeah, and the longer this process actually goes on, the more likely bugs are actually to creep in, which is why you actually have to take the approach of never making these big, gigantic Dumbo drop code commits in the first place. And you always have to, from the very start, go with, I have to be doing small targeted commits. You have to be like a good surgeon. You have to be minimally invasive changes every time and give things time to recover in between, right?
Yeah, and which can become especially hard whenever you're doing experimental or prototyping projects, because whenever you're doing that, a lot of times you will get large sort of change sets because you're working around problems that could be fixed in another component of your product or somewhere else.
Well, and especially that it's likely no other developer at the firm fully understands or is even gonna understand the problem, no matter how much they do, without being involved to the level that you are.
Right, right. And I've seen that a lot in projects where I am the SME, something like that, because it's just, well, nobody else is touching this over a certain amount of time. And so, you get somebody that's trying to review it and they're like, what the hell am I reading, man?
Yeah, and you have to avoid that as much as possible. And I think the problem that you get from like reviewer fatigue with regard to lots of PRs coming in is a less bad problem to have than a reviewer eyes glaze over problem to have.
Yeah,
ultimately. And to be fair, most of the way that things work in companies is it's like it's a production process. I'm churning through little stuff here and there, and people love to hit low hanging fruit, easy looking stuff to knock out because I got my numbers up, baby.
Yeah. Pump them up. Pump those numbers up.
Yeah, and that's the thing I realized early on with regard to teams succeeding was teams sort of have to structure their work such that it makes them succeed in the way that they're evaluated, which means almost always in development organizations, I have lots of pull requests reviewed. I have lots of comments. I have lots of things like that. You can't fight that reality of the situation, and you instead
always
have to
kind of churn it in.
Yeah, you have to instead embrace that and be like, okay, I'm going to have lots more bugs filed. I'm going to have a lot tighter changes. I'm going to have a lot more tasks. We're going to have a lot more pull requests. We're going to have a lot more reviews because that's what actually works with regard to visibility to management and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, well, and even just visibility to anybody that's testing your change, reviewing the change, all that sort of stuff. The smaller it is, the more they can grok it. Even if the small change has big implications, it's still going to go in easier because of the smallness of the change, even if that change changes almost everything in your product.
Yeah, and there's some irritation from a point of view of on the QA end of things. They generally don't like the humongous numbers of change sets coming in because what that usually means is retest. So certainly people who come from a QA background, like both of us, we also understand those concerns, and we like to balance that, and we tend to get bigger change sets than normal from a point of view of if we go by our default thing. But we have to restrain ourselves and instead make things for other developers because they're the first gate you have to get past, right? And so the idea would be that you have to then structure your testing effort around that as well, which means that you're not doing your whole test suite all the time. You're doing targeted tests against just the stuff that changed, which a lot of times just the stuff that changed actually really doesn't have any impact yet because it's just I'm building superstructure or something like that.
Right, which also means that as you're working on these sorts of things, if you have the time, going for an automated acceptance test, doing some sort of automated test, whether it's an integration test or a unit test, something like that, that exercises whatever you're trying to do here, that is the large, wide-ranging kind of change for this small change set. If you can do something that provides a little bit more of rigor there in an automated fashion, even if it's not a test that always passes, it at least will tip off your QAs as to, hey, this guy
is where you need to look.
This is where we need to look, so he made a test for it.
Well, it also provides the kind of confidence that reviewers need when they're, like I said, they're speed reading. They don't really understand the problem, but they can run the test and they can see that, well, it looks like your changes actually work, and I'm pretty sure this acceptance test does what it says it does, e.g., we're satisfying the acceptance criteria for X, Y, and Z, so it's not breaking things too bad, so we can probably move on.
Right, because you can at least tell by scanning a test whether this actually is trying to verify whatever contract, implicit or explicit, the code is trying to make here.
Yeah, and that's sort of a thing with software forensics. A lot of times the only real characterization and real documentation a piece of code has is its tests.
And in fact, that's the typical definition of, say, a legacy code system, is that there is no documentation other than the tests.
Yeah, and so that's the two ways that you have to mitigate these sort of concerns is number one, smaller change sets, and number two, better tested change sets, which is going to impact schedule, and you're going to eventually run into the iron law conflict, and this is going to be a part of your career. It's going to cause conflict, and you're just going to have to accept it because at some point you're just not going to have the time, you're not going to have the resources, you're not going to have the what you need to actually do this to where it will go through the process smoothly.
Yeah, because the other alternative is you become the guy that's so committed to a company that, yeah, you're trying to get everything, you're trying to satisfy everything, and then all you do is burn out, and then your management's like, geez, why is this guy so committed to the company? Go and get a life, dude, kind of thing, because then the employee themselves are more interested in validation from their working life than, say, in their personal life. And
that's how you get these kind of reviews where it's this Columboism. That's how this stuff happens in the first place. Is people are too attached to the work above and beyond what their professional responsibility actually is, because again they attach a lot of their self-worth to how the code actually works out. When the fact is, vast majority of these projects, they don't have to be satisfying your image as to your level of quality with the program. No, in fact, they just have to satisfy the customer needs, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know,
and especially if you have specific stakeholder requirements that are not as specific as what's in a review, something like that, you can even have your intermediate customer, so to speak, there running interference for you as far as, well, I don't care, it can be broke here, that's fine, we don't actually care about that.
Yeah, we certainly don't care right now.
Yeah, it may be something for later, but again, refer to the meme that is our cover for this video.
Yeah, and I think one of the better ways one of the other techniques I've used is I generally write sort of like an essay, like a term paper with regard to what I'm doing with any given change so that people actually can like fully understand the story, because that's really what's going on. They're trying to build the story of what the hell is this? Yeah. Right? And when you can provide them up front, this is the story, and by the way, that's what you put in the commit message, then it pretty much smooths the whole process from top to bottom.
Right, and that sort of thing also helps you whenever you're trying to either bring this to a performance review or something like that. You can say like, hey man, look at these commits. I'm documenting exactly what I'm doing here and all that sort of thing. I've got X, Y, and Z. I can show you how I'm delivering value to the firm, and this is why.
Yeah. So hopefully this was helpful to you guys, and we will see you all later.